Hello, beautiful community. The issue of Ukraine potentially developing nuclear weapons is being ventilated. So let me give an infinitesimal political analysis of the issue after reading a little bit from today's Times, which covers this news story. Ukraine could develop a rudimentary nuclear bomb within months if Donald Trump withdraws US military assistance, according to a briefing paper prepared for the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. The country could quickly develop a basic device with a similar technology to the Fat Man bomb dropped on Nagasaki. Quote, creating a simple atomic bomb, as the United States did within the framework of the Manhattan Project, would not be a difficult task 80 years later, the document reads. Last month, President Zelensky said that he told Trump that Ukraine would need nuclear weapons to guarantee his country's security if it were prevented from joining NATO, as Putin has demanded. Zelensky later said he had meant that there were no security guarantees for Ukraine, and Ukrainian officials have since denied that Ukraine is considering nuclear rearmament. The paper, which is published by the Center for Army Conversion and Disarmament Studies, an influential Ukrainian military think tank, has been shared with the country's deputy defense minister and will be presented at a conference. It is not endorsed by the Ukrainian government, but it sets out a hypothetical legal basis under which Ukraine could withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, the ratification of which was contingent on the 1994 Budapest Memorandum guarantees. Western experts say Ukraine would need 5 years to develop a nuclear weapon and a suitable carrier. The report authors say it's more like 1 year. They also say that should the US abandon Ukraine, Britain could honor its security obligation under the Budapest Memorandum by helping Ukraine to develop a nuclear deterrent. Let's talk about this. If you're Ukrainian and you could wave a magic wand and get a big nuclear arsenal, there are some reasons against doing that, but the reasons for doing it are very compelling indeed. Now, it's also clear that under supporting Ukraine may increase the chances of countries around the world wanting to get hold of nuclear weapons. At the same time, ventilating the nuclear card may be diplomatically counterproductive for Ukraine. It's not going to get more Western support, and it could irritate folks in Western corridors of power. A couple of thoughts that the Zelensky administration must have are, first, that developing nuclear weapons would not help Ukraine's cause of sustaining Western military and economic support. And the second thought they must have is that a small nuclear capability may not be sufficient to deter Putin. I mean, just think about it. Putin is throwing about rockets in Eastern Europe. He's invaded Ukraine. And we're struggling to deal with that, in part because he has a giant nuclear arsenal. What if Putin had a relatively small, a tiny nuclear capability? Would we be deterred in the same way? And the answer is no. That's to say, having a tiny nuclear capability is closer to not having a nuclear capability than it is to having a giant nuclear arsenal. It could end civilization. So, simply having some nuclear capability is not sufficient, right? You need more than that. And so what, putting these two things together, the Zelensky administration will be thinking is that trying to develop nuclear weapons may lose them Western support and not get them a deterrent against Putin. Let's put ourselves a little bit in the shoes of a hypothetical US president now, but you could have the same conversation with leaders in the UK, Germany, France. And imagine that it's not Donald Trump, imagine it's Joe Biden, and Joe Biden is 60 and he's running for a second term. and somebody comes to Biden and says, well, look, we've got this problem in Eastern Europe, which you know so well about. We've got this mentalist in the Kremlin. He's throwing around rockets. He's doing genocidal rhetoric. He is invading a neighboring country, and he's armed to the teeth with nuclear weapons, and that's a headache for us. But now imagine if Ukraine had nuclear weapons too. It could be a stable democracy 5 years from now. But it could also be a collapsed state, and it could also be an undemocratic ethno-nationalist tyranny. It's conceivable. And that, from the vantage point of a US president, would look like having two mentalists with nuclear weapons in Eastern Europe instead of one. So there is no prospect of anything other than a very sharply negative attitude in Washington to this. And the Ukrainian government understands that. And let me just put it analytically. The commitment of a hypothetical US administration to Ukraine's survival may be outweighed by their commitment to Ukraine not getting nuclear weapons. It may be more important for Washington that Ukraine doesn't go nuclear than it is that Ukraine survives as a viable sovereign state. So the reality is that the answers here are pessimistic if you thought that this was a sort of escape card for Ukraine. What Ukraine really needs is some kind of a viable Western security guarantee. Now that's overwhelmingly unlikely to come in the form of NATO in the short to medium term. So it needs to come in some other form. And that's an incredibly difficult and some may argue unrealistic ask. But it's also arguably a necessary ask for Ukraine. And I'm one of those who believes that Ukraine needs more than just being militarily propped up. It needs a security guarantee for a potential peace to be sustainable, to be compatible with Ukraine's political, economic sustenance and governability. Lots of love.